Hi, everyone. Welcome to the program. Thanks for connecting a little bit early today. We're going to get started promptly at the top of the hour, but I wanted to, for those of you who came here early, just give you a little information about the program, and also we'll learn a little bit about the personal life of our featured speakers today. So a friendly reminder, the control panel is where you can find lots of goodies. Under the handout section, you can download a copy of today's presentation. You can also find a report on best practices in deal origination across private equity. Please ask lots of questions today. We'd really appreciate that. You can ask questions through the control panel. There's a question feature there. And otherwise, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. I wanted to ask each of our panelists, I thought it'd be interesting to hear what they pursue in their spare time. Jack, why don't we start with you? Any hidden talents or hidden passions that you pursue in your spare time?
I have no talents, period. Yeah, we have 3 kids, 13, 10, and 8, and so that probably sums it up right there. We stay very busy with them, with sports and so on. We were talking about this in another call, David, but we've done a bunch of skiing this year. It's a great year. We've been out in Colorado mostly, and it's been a lot of fun, and all the kids are absolutely enthralled with that sport, which makes me very happy. So those are a couple of things we've been up to, and we'll keep it going.
All right, thanks, Jack. And Ron, how about you? What's a hidden passion or talent that you pursue in your spare time?
People get spare time when they're investment banking. I didn't get that memo. Unlike Jack, like when you don't have a management fee, things are a little different. We just recently bought a place in Naples, which I hardly ever use, but it's nice to go down there, and I like to read. I like to sit on the beach and read. So if I could do that and have a management fee, life would be wonderful. But I don't get to use it very much, but it really is enjoyable when I do get to use it.
Okay, that's a good one. Hopefully we'll all get invites soon, Ron.
Anytime you want.
And Doug, what's a hidden talent of yours?
I'm much like Jack. I don't know that I have any hidden talents, and frankly, I have limited amount of free time with a 4.5 and a 20-month-old, both boys. So most of the time when I'm not on the road for work, it's spent with them and picking up and following behind them to make sure they don't break and or destroy anything.
Okay, it sounds like they're going to keep you busy. And Nadim, hidden passion?
No doubt.
Hidden passion?
Hot off the press, as the data guy on this call, I would say people in investment banking and private equity need to get some hobbies and distractions based on the responses that we heard today, and relax and enjoy life time to time. But I wouldn't say a talent. One of my hobbies, my son, who's now a junior in high school, and I both started taking guitar lessons 6-7 years ago. And it's been a great kind of musical journey. It's great to see how his tastes in music have evolved. He's more of a Beatles guy. I'm more of a Rolling Stones guy. He's now leaning towards Led Zeppelin and some other stuff. So we like to play the guitar from time to time and enjoy music and collect vinyls and that kind of thing. So that's what comes to mind right now.
Awesome.
Cool. So everybody, we're going to get started in just a moment. And to my speakers, just a friendly reminder, I am hearing some pings, some computer-like sounds, like pings, notification sounds. So please do go on mute during the opening presentations, and maybe if you can go to your preferences, try to reduce the or remove the alerts for the time being. All right, let's jump right into it. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a special private equity career news webinar, Top Strategies for Winning Great Deals in 2023. I'm David Toll. I'm the publisher of Private Equity Career News, and I'll be your moderator for the balance of the program. I'd like to start out thanking our sponsor, SBS by Bain & Company. They are an award-winning provider of actionable data and analytics for private equity firms seeking to optimize their deal sourcing efforts, and we're very grateful to them for making the program possible. A few housekeeping announcements before we get into it. First, a friendly reminder to any reporters on the program today that we are off the record. Please reach out to the speakers individually for permission if you'd like to use anything that they say today in an article. Second, you can download a copy of the slides from today's presentation directly from your control panel. You can also download there a copy of the results of a 2021 survey of business development professionals with valuable information on industry origination practices. Third, later today, I will send you a recording of the program, so no need to take extensive notes. And finally, many of you asked questions of our panelists when you registered for the program, and we will plan to address those questions throughout the discussion portion. Please also, though, feel free to ask questions at any time during the program. I'll keep an eye on it, and we'll take your questions either as they come or we'll save about 15-20 minutes at the end for a more formal Q&A period. Okay, that's it for housekeeping, and I'm very grateful to have 4 expert speakers today to guide you through the topic. Starting with Nadim Malik. Nadim is founder and CEO of our sponsor, SBS by Bain & Company. And Nadim's going to present statistics describing the state of the market and also address the role that technology plays in helping deal originators see a higher percentage of relevant transactions. We are very happy to have Doug Brookman. He is Managing Director of Investment Banking and Head of Financial Sponsor Coverage at Mesirow Financial. We also have Ron Kahn, Managing Director at Lincoln International, where he leads the firm's thriving debt advisory and valuation practices. And finally, we have Jack Seneff, Managing Director at Thompson Street Capital Partners, is based in St. Louis. Jack is heavily involved in the firm's deal sourcing efforts across healthcare, technology, business services, and consumer products and services. So before we get into the discussion, I want to find out more about our speakers. Doug, starting with you, tell us just a little bit more about Mesirow and your role there.
Good morning, everybody. Mesirow is a financial services organization headquartered in Chicago, multifaceted operation, including investment banking, where I sit, wealth management, private equity, fund of funds, credit tenant lease, sale leaseback platforms, have $200+ billion under advisory at this point. Founder, family-owned business, 200 shareholders out of the 600 of us. So, been around 85 years, long-standing Chicago institution. I joined the firm about 2 years ago. I joined from the buy side to help build out a financial sponsor coverage effort for the firm. As we eclipsed 40 bankers at the time, we're now up to 50. I joined from a firm in Los Angeles called Pacific Avenue Capital Partners, and prior to that was at Platinum Equity. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Doug. Ron, tell us more about Lincoln International and your role there.
Lincoln International is also based in Chicago. We have, I think it's about 20 offices now in 18 countries. Most of that is to facilitate the M&A activities of the firm. Lincoln is dedicated just solely to investment banking, and most of our focus is towards helping private equity firms, whether they want to sell a portfolio company, buy a portfolio company, finance a portfolio company or an acquisition, value a portfolio company. We really do cater to private equity. We have just under 900 employees. Lincoln is 100% owned by the partners. So every December 31st, we promote whatever it is, 8, 10, 12 people, and they get the honor of writing checks to be able to join the partnership. But it works very, very well because when you make decisions, everybody has a very common interest. As I said, probably 65% of the firm is dedicated to M&A activities, and I oversee the rest of that, which is primarily the capital advisory firm, capital advisory activities, and the valuation practice.
Super, thank you, Ron. And Jack, tell us more about Thompson Street Capital and what you do there.
Yeah, good morning. So Jack Sineff with Thompson Street Capital. We are a private equity firm based in St. Louis, Missouri. We've been around for a little over 20 years now. We're investing out of our 6th fund, which is about 1.5 billion. We're middle market focused, growth focused investors, so trying to partner with great businesses and then think about ways to accelerate revenue growth, both organically and via acquisition. 3 main verticals for us: healthcare and life sciences, software and technology, and then, as David said, some consumer and business services as well. Again, great to be here with you. For me, I've been with the firm since 2008. I co-lead our deal origination team and then also lead our portfolio support group, which is, of course, as the name implies, delivering resources to the businesses we partner with.
Okay, super, Jack. And now let me turn it over to Nadim to introduce himself and his firm, and then Nadim will go into a presentation shedding some light on the current state of the M&A market. Nadim?
Thanks, David. Nadim here, CEO of SPS by Bain & Company. Thank you all for joining us today. Hope everyone's year is off to a great start. At SPS by Bain & Company, we're continuing to do what we do best, which is helping our clients position themselves for relevant deal sourcing opportunities in the current market, or any market for that matter, and getting an advantage through data analytics, technology, and automation. You know, given the slowdown in deal activity in the second half of last year and overall market performance, recession fears, I think a lot of people were looking forward to turning the page on 2022. Just kind of sort of put it behind us. Many were expecting things to change, whether it was an uptick of deal flow, signs of the Fed potentially pausing interest rates, improvements in the economy, etc. So, are things changing? If so, for better or for worse? Or are they pretty much where they left off last year? Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing the perspective of our panelists, who are great at what they do and have been doing it for a while, each of them grappling with many of the same questions and concerns as our audience. And before turning things over to them, I wanted to spend the next 8 to 10 minutes walking through some slides to help frame our conversation, starting with what you see in front of you right now, overall private equity and M&A volume. Following a very dramatic increase in 2021, deal activity levels fell back down to earth in 2022, declining by just under 20% for the year. As the data continues to get reported on 2022 deals, that decline will end up being even less. Despite that decline, deal activity came in at the 2nd highest level we've ever seen since we began tracking the data. So very important to note, that's a lot of deals. Also important to note, this was the 2nd consecutive year that private equity outpaced corporate buyers as a share of overall M&A volume. This was a first last year, and now we have a 2nd consecutive year, and a trend that will perhaps continue to persist in the years ahead. Moving on to the next slide, breaking down deal activity quarterly tells a different story. The quarterly numbers in 2022 trended downward quarter after quarter, which is different. if you look at prior years, it almost always trends up as the year progresses, or at the very least stays more or less flat. Q4 is currently down 40% compared to Q4 last year. Now, when the dust settles and we have a more complete picture of Q4, that amount decrease will come down, but it's still going to be pretty dramatic. Moving on to the next slide. Here's a look at the most active sectors for private equity activity for 2022 compared to 2021. Industrials was the most active and down less than 10% year over year, followed by business services and technology. The tech sector has seen the largest decline in activity, followed by the consumer and healthcare sectors. Moving on to the next slide. Part of the reason private equity is outpacing corporate activity is due to the increase in add-ons by private equity firms. The trend in prior years of the buy and build and roll-up strategy not only continued, but accelerated pretty significantly in 2022, with PE firms now completing 2.6 add-ons for every platform. It'll be really interesting to see how far this trend will go. Will we surpass 3 add-ons for every buyout? What about 4? I'll mention that a lot of our clients are making a much more focused effort around their deal sourcing strategy on the smaller end of the market for add-ons, which is an entirely different universe than the platforms they're used to investing in. The added benefit of the smaller market is that some of the more macro and global factors, funding for those deals, are less prominent on the lower end of the market. Moving on to the next slide, let's take a look at private equity pipeline data. While at first glance, it looks like median deal flow dropped pretty dramatically in Q4 compared to the prior 2 quarters. It actually came in pretty high on a relative basis. It's the highest fourth quarter since we began tracking the data, and way higher than Q4 2021 numbers. So what does this mean? Does that mean that we should expect more closed deal activity? Well, not necessarily. This could be a result of private equity firms just getting better at deal sourcing and processes continuing to having a broader and broader reach and hitting more pipelines in the private equity world, and not necessarily translate into more closed deals. So let's keep an eye on that one. Moving on to the next slide. There's a lot going on in this one. So let's start with the top right, which shows the most active PE firms in terms of both new platform investments and exits last year. On the top left, privately held companies continue to represent over 60% of all new platform investments made by private equity firms. And there was a pretty sharp increase up to 66% in 2022, the highest we've ever seen. And finally, on the bottom left, PE firms are exiting more to corporate buyers versus private equity buyers as a percentage compared to last year. Both of these charts taken together suggest that private equity firms aren't as active on exits as they've been in the past, which makes sense and consistent with what we're hearing from iBanks. And when they are selling, it's more often to a corporate buyer. Moving on to the next slide. Here are the sell-side intermediaries or financial advisors that sold the most companies to private equity buyers in different size range categories of enterprise value in the US and Canada last year. It really is amazing how much this list can vary just by size range, and a reminder of how misleading it can be just to rely on published generic league tables or uncustomized data to determine how to prioritize your time from a sourcing perspective. You really need to have that market data sliced by sector with as much granularity and precision as possible, geography, control versus minority deals, special situations, any other deal attributes that are relevant for you, even broad versus limited processes to get the right target for your market. And then that's just the starting point. From there, you can take your own pipeline and deal flow, layer it on top of what's taking place in the market, and see what share of mind you have, not just in the aggregate, but by individual intermediary and intermediary professional. From there, you can eliminate a lot of guesswork and save a ton of time on how to prioritize your outreach moving forward. Moving to the next slide. Direct to sponsor sourcing is becoming more and more of a thing and an area we're concentrating with based on our private equity firm clients' requests. And according to our data, just under 6,000 platform investments were made by private equity firms that are sitting in portfolios that were originally acquired between 2012 to 2019. And logic dictates that there might be a temporary pause here as we try to figure things out, but logic dictates they're going to need to come to market at some point relatively soon. Our clients are able to sift through the granularity, i.e. deal sizes, sectors, geographies, maturity, even look at the specific PE professionals whose portfolio that asset is in, their contact info, and a deal connection functionality where they can see if they know anyone that that individual has done a deal with as a way to get a warm intro. This really helps them get smart and more proactive on this deal sourcing channel. Moving on to the next slide, finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a quick opportunity to mention our weekly newsletter called The Source. It comes out on Thursday mornings. Sometimes it's a written piece, other times it's a video interview. The common theme is we try to cover top strategies, tips, and tactics that are being used by professionals, typically that we work with and respect, market trends from other industry experts, and any latest reports and insights that we think might be of value. You can go to the address at the bottom to sign up and make sure you're on the distribution list. With that, I'd like to turn it back to our moderator, Mr. David Toll, and our panelists for our discussion and Q&A.
All right, Nadim, thank you very much for those statistics. And yep, we're going to move into the discussion portion of the program now. And we really need help from attendees. Please do ask questions through the question feature on your control panel, and that'll help make sure that we cover what you are interested in today. All right, before we jump right in, I do want to attempt a polling question to take advantage of a very sizable audience that we have today. And my first polling question for everyone is, how do you expect the number of platform deals you do in this year, 2023, to compare with last year? And might take a moment to pop up on your screen. All right, I'm going to give you another couple of seconds to answer. Okay, I'm closing the poll and sharing the results. And pretty interesting, well, the plurality, 40% expect to do the same number of platform deals this year as last year. More than a quarter expect the number to be down from last year, and then the rest expect to do better. And then I want to ask one more polling question, and that will have basically the same question, but having to do with add-ons. How do you expect the number of add-on deals you close in 2023 to close with to compare with last year? And I'll give you another 10 seconds to answer. Okay, so the results here are similar, but a little bit more optimistic. So in fact, 50% expect the number of add-ons they do this year to be even or down from last year. and then another 50% expect the number of add-ons to be up at their firms this year. So so that's what we found out from our audience, and now let's turn to our featured speakers for their insights. And I want to start with Doug. Doug, tell us what's the quantity and quality of deal flow like out there right as we sit, right as we speak.
Well, based on the polling that you just received, I don't know that my my commentary will align. It's almost shocking to see that folks think that people will get more platforms done this year. You know, I think the quality of deal flow right now is definitely down from the prior 2 years. Businesses are obviously seeing margin compression, and there's all different types of issues facing the market. I would say quantity is down as well, but I would say it's primarily down because of the lack of financing or perceived financing opportunities or availability, and everybody's trying to wait it out a bit and just see, you know, who else is doing deals, and then maybe start to chase some opportunities. I would say I get a very, very mixed response when I speak with people. I've gotten emails back that tell me it's crickets around here, no deals, no one's really working on new stuff. Everyone's focused internally on either add-ons or just the portfolio and optimizing in general, to we're under a letter on a couple of things and we're pushing really hard on X, Y, and Z. So like, I think that based on the strategy, based on the industries, I think it's going to be a very, very varied year in terms of quality, quantity, you know, and everyone's outlook individually.
And Doug, what about if you dig a little deeper, industry by industry? Are there particular industries that stand out as being more active right now, and others maybe just complete, as you say, crickets or shut down?
So stripping out industry for a second, I would say that the founder-owner landscape continues to be a relatively ripe universe. As a founder ages and they want to sell, they want to sell their business. And I think that finding the right partner, finding somebody who can help them chart, you know, or help them through the uncharted territory can be somewhat supportive, have a calming effect, and be what that founder needs. The private equity universe at this point seems to be, I would say, on hold in terms of navigating the exit to their portfolio companies and trying to position themselves to potentially think about that towards the end of the year. But I would say TBD. The industries that we're seeing that remain hot, and I think will continue to be hot almost irrespective, would be the paper, packaging, and plastics markets. Food and beverage is another area where we're seeing consistent activity. Aerospace and defense is an area that has suffered a bit. The businesses themselves seem to be doing reasonably well, unless you're tied to some of the supply chain issues, with Boeing and other specific projects. But it would appear that based on just some of the geopolitical issues, that aerospace and defense may be in a bit of a holding pattern from a deal flow perspective. Technology seems to be an area that continues to consolidate and remain active. Maybe valuations come down a bit, but I don't see things necessarily slowing down dramatically there. And healthcare, I think, will be probably the most stable component of the marketplace, just given the end markets and the people that are utilizing that system. So
thank you, Doug. And Jack, it happens that you play in two of those, at least two of those markets that Doug said are still pretty active: healthcare and software and technology. What are you seeing in terms of activity?
Yeah, I agree with what Doug said. I mean, we have seen, just to add maybe a little bit to that, we've seen healthcare actually turn on a bit more. Healthcare was slower going back a year or so relative to software and tech, and software and tech was very busy a year or so ago relative to healthcare. We've seen that maybe invert a little bit, where neither have shut off, but healthcare's kind of come on a bit more, which is good. I mean, that's part, I'm sure, like many folks listening, that's part of why we have a little bit of a diversified strategy. You know, we can stay busy when one of our markets, one of our end markets is maybe a bit slower. But yeah, well, I'll hold comment later on how I would try to look in the crystal ball for this year. But I think there's a lot of value in what Doug just said.
And Jack, in healthcare, what is driving activity? I know it's a large and diverse field, but in general, what's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, one, we're all getting older and less healthy over time, so those trends are nice from a demand standpoint. But on a more serious level, I mean, I think, you know, COVID was obviously very disruptive. Some businesses benefited a lot in the healthcare space from COVID. Others were impacted negatively. In either case, it made a transaction difficult coming straight out of that for many businesses. And so I think, you know, we've started to have that go a little bit towards, you know, the rearview mirror. And I think, you know, as that is flushed out some, I think there's a little bit more certainty of what the go forward might look like for businesses. And so I think more of them are starting to come back to market. And, you know, many of these companies are very attractive, nice recurring businesses, again, you know, playing on great demand trends. So I think it was more of a timing issue, but, you know, COVID was disruptive regardless of how it impacted positive or negative for these companies.
And Jack, we got a question from an audience member, so I want to stick with you for a quick follow-up, and that is, how does Thompson Street cover the long tail of lower middle market intermediaries for add-ons? So kind of a nuts and bolts question about your deal sourcing operation there.
Yeah, I mean, we think there's a lot of value in the long tail, not just for add-ons, but every once in a while for, you know, for a platform that could make sense as well. And so, you know, I mean, I think like anything, you know, all the way through our, you know, relationships with larger investment banks down, you know, through the midsection into the long tail, and then direct outreach. I mean, we try to maintain a pretty data-driven approach. So we spend a lot of time in the data. It's no surprise that I'm on here with Nadeem and SPS. We've been partners for a long time. We've worked together for a long time together. Great data source for us, looking at opportunity analysis or approaching opportunity analysis and thinking about, you know, what intermediaries, business brokers, boutique investment banks, et cetera, down the long tail, you know, should we be developing relationships with? And those relationships, I think, you know, to us, we try to be content based and be very specific on, you know, here's what we are looking for. If it's add-ons, you know, we're trying to market and communicate to that long tail and be very specific in what we're seeking. And if it's platforms, you know, across all of our intermediary relationships, we're trying to be very specific there as well, and explain in great detail, maybe perhaps not too much, but in great detail, the investment thesis or theses we're pursuing and why we're interested in specific businesses and what we're looking for. Right? That seems to resonate with not just the long tail, but the whole the kind of the entire market.
Okay, thanks, Jack. And let's turn to the credit markets, which we really need to spend some good amount of time on in this program. We've been doing these webinars for 3 or 4 years now, and the credit markets have always been, oh yeah, they're just great, and let's talk about other things. Ron, you head up the capital markets advisory practice at Lincoln International. You're an expert in the capital markets. Tell us what's going on right now.
So first of all, let's not blame M&A all on the lenders because they actually have a valid reason for being more pessimistic, more concerned. And just one thing that people lose sight over: private equity groups have upside when they make investments. It's actually an unlimited upside. Lenders at best, they only get their money back. They have a lot of downside if they don't get their money back, and you start losing some principal. You have to make a lot of loans and get a lot of interest income to offset a principal loss. And so lenders and sponsors obviously go in with a very, very different mindset. But I actually shared Doug's more pessimistic glass half full outlook of what's going on in the M&A market. And we can talk about fundamentals, and I've got some statistics later if we have time about how companies are performing. But what's happening with the M&A market, particularly regarding financing, it's a math problem. It's an easy math problem. And I will try and walk you through it a little bit just so you can understand what I'm getting at. Let's just take a hypothetical company, and these are a little bit bigger numbers than maybe I should have used, but $500,000 enterprise value that in December 31st got $300 million of debt, straight 60-40 debt to equity. December 31st, that the spread on a unitranche loan at that 60-40, so it's a little over 7 times. It's a good leverage, which you could easily get in December 21. The spread was 550. The spread today is probably 100 basis points higher, which is 650. All right, 100 basis points, I probably can handle it. But here's the thing that really has affected lending and therefore the M&A market. SOFR at the time was literally 8 basis points. And if you look at SOFR today, it's 460, 470, so you put in, even with the floor that you had before, the interest rate that somebody was paying for 7 times debt, but it's 6 times that today, was 6.5%, and today it's a little over 11%. It is very, very hard to get financing today for less than 11 to 12% compared to 6.5%. What that did is the interest expense, if you do all this math, went from 20 million to 34 million. That is a 35%. That is a what is it, what does it come out to? 35% increase in interest, something like that. The interest coverage charge went from 2 times to 1.2 times, and that's interest. Fixed charge is going to be a lot lower. So lenders in the environment, you just can't leverage a company to the extent that you could a year ago. And as a result, 2 things can happen. Either purchase prices are going to have to come down, or buyers like Jack are going to have to take a lower IRR. And there is right now, neither one wants to give. And so there's just not that many deals being done other than they very, very good, pristine, consistent, stable earnings. Interesting, if you take that math further so what I'm saying, if a private equity group wants to get the same IRR today as they did a year ago, so it was just like 17, 18%, somewhere in that range, not only do they have to contend with higher interest expense, lenders are requiring more equity because of the uncertainty. So where you could leverage a company up 60-40, today it's probably 50-50. Put it all together, it actually translates into somewhere between a 15 and 20% decrease in purchase price, so that a private equity group can get the same, let's call it 18%, throw out a number, IRR. So this is assuming that there's no margin compression, that the company is doing extremely well. It's a math problem.
And Ron, are we seeing any evidence that that purchase prices are coming down, either Ron or Doug?
Let me just say that what we have seen on the deals that are actually getting done, which are, not nearly, they're a lot less than they were. The multiple that we're tracking for deals that they've done is no different than it was a year ago. It's right around, I think, between 11 and 12%. So there's a selection bias there. These are very, very good performing companies, and as a result, everybody wants to buy them. Everybody's willing to pay up for them, even if the IRR comes down. And so those multiples tend to be stagnant with where they were a year ago.
I would agree with one addition in that a few of the deals that we've seen where the headline EV or value has remained constant, there has been a bit more structure built into some of these deals where there is some downside to the deal, if whether it's earnout or heavier rollover, so the percentages of ownership are a bit different than they were maybe a year or two ago. So I would say that would be the only difference to what we're seeing, and maybe in the founder universe as opposed to the sponsor universe. The founders are obviously probably more likely to do that than private equity, although it would appear that private equity firms are also willing to stay in some of these deals to try and monetize their investments and generate some liquidity for LPs.
Thanks, Doug. And Ron, back to you. A question from the audience says, with interest rates expecting to rise even more, what are the prospects then for the industry in 2023 and 2024? And maybe Ron, maybe tell us what what Lincoln International's, crystal ball says about interest rates.
Well, I don't talk to Powell that often. I mean, conventional wisdom is going to go up a little bit more, so SOFR is going to top out. If you look at the forward SOFR curve, it tops out at, I don't know, between 5, 5.25, 5.5. I doubt that it'll go much higher than that, but I don't think it's going to come down. And that's the part that bothers me in terms of what the prognosis is for the deal market, because the numbers that I just gave you, and that assumes a 460 SOFR. It could go up a little bit higher. Most lenders, when they're doing their sensitivities, they're using somewhere around 5.25, 5.5 SOFR to see if fixed charge and interest coverage works. So I think that these rates, they could, maybe they're going to come down a little bit, but I think they're going to be here for the next 12, 18, 24 months. And so somehow people are going to have to get creative. They're going to get creative and coming up with deal structures. Private equity is going to have to lower their IRR expectations, or seller, which is probably more likely, is going to have to say, you know what, we need an exit. We need to return make some distributions to the limited partners, and so we are going to have to face reality and take a lower purchase price.
And Jack, thank you, Ron. Jack, let me turn to you to see how, which of those outcomes you think is most likely. You're in the trenches doing deals in the face of higher interest rates, possibility of recession, people still talking about. How are you adapting to these new market conditions?
Yeah, I mean, well, we've spoken about interest rates, possibility of recession. I mean, let's not forget inflation, a war in Europe, continued COVID disruption, which is manifesting itself still through supply chain in different areas of the world and different sectors. So I mean, there's a lot of challenges out there. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is kind of what I personally am focused on. And I think as we think about the deal market and just deal flow and decisions on when to go out and how, I think when some of that uncertainty is alleviated, when some of the uncertainty dissipates, I think the deal market will turn back on some. And I think that's because, as some folks have said here, I think there's a lot of founder-owned businesses who, don't want to wait forever, can't wait forever. If retirement is imminent or transition, whatever it might be. And in the private equity world, I mean, there's a pace that needs to be maintained. We can be patient for sure. This is across the industry, but I think there's there'll be some pent-up demand for exits, and then of course for the entire industry to put capital to work too. So I think we'll all kind of deal with it, frankly. And I think the big limiter right now is, how much will interest rate go up? I think Ron knows this way better than I ever will. But at some point when, there's some certainty, hey, it's not going to go up anymore. We're kind of there. It's not going to come down for a while. I agree with that too. But at least that would be one element of uncertainty that is removed perhaps from the equation or lessened. Same thing on inflation. When we start to see those numbers, on a little bit more of a prolonged basis, slow or stop, that's another element of uncertainty. When there's some, these other issues, there's some, they're reconciled in some way. I mean, that's I think the enemy of deal flow, I think, is uncertainty broadly, and I think we'll all just kind of deal with that. Now, the other piece, though, that Ron mentioned, and I think makes a ton of sense on, look, I mean, debt is also more expensive, and if multiples are not going to come down, if valuation is not going to come down, and debt is higher, I mean, obviously there's an impact there. I think valuations will come down to some extent, but probably not for the A properties, as I think everybody said here as well. And so I think it has never been more important in our industry. I'll make this big statement, that not that I'm qualified to make it, but it seems to me that it's never been more important for private equity firms to have real conviction stepping into a business, stepping into an investment, on the value that they can add to that company. Being able to grow that business in a meaningful way, being able to help with margin expansion, being able to go out and do those acquisitions. And the slide earlier that Nadeem showed with the increase in the number of add-ons versus platform. I mean, I think that will continue because that is a growth lever that's meaningful, and if done right, can really move the needle. And I think those, which is a healthy thing for our industry, more value add, more conviction around growth. I mean, we're investing in that internally and via executives and management teams, having the right teams we're partnering with, consultants and so on. I mean, it's I think that will be the next big phase, if you will, of our industry. It's we have to really go add value. We have to really help these businesses grow, and that's not negative. That's a positive for our space, I think.
Thank you, Jack, and that's a great segue into my next question, where we're going to go a little bit deeper into performance of portfolio companies across the board. And Ron, you're in addition to capital markets advisory, you're in charge of the valuations group there. Tell us what you're seeing in terms of performance and valuations of the portfolio companies in your database.
So let me touch on performance for a second. And this data comes from, so the valuation practice does, let's call it 4,500 different portfolio company valuations every quarter. 99% are obviously for sponsors, and it's across the board of the lenders who are our clients. So 4,500 companies for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, let's call it 6 quarters, including this December 31st quarter, which is almost hot off the press. Right around 80% of those companies have had year-over-year revenue gains. Good news. The bad news is only, let's call it on average, 55% of those companies have had earnings gains. So obviously, what you always want earnings to grow faster than revenue. When revenue is faster than growing faster than earnings, that's not a good thing. What that does translate into is margins deteriorations pretty much through 2022 of about 1.6%. And we've broken up this data into business services, consumer, healthcare, industrials, and TMT. Every single industry has shown a margin decline. Some a little bit greater than the others, but they have all shown increasing revenue compared to earnings, which is obviously a trend that you don't want to see. And
Ron, are you seeing any early signs of actual distress among portfolio companies? Are you building up your restructuring teams in anticipation of something?
The distress is coming from liquidity. So going back to the first thing I mentioned, when you have interest expense going up 70%, and now 35% of your earnings are coming out to pay an increase in 35% of your interest expense hitting earnings, you just don't you have liquidity issues, particularly. And in my example, I basically said there's no capex. And so companies, because again, and with revenue increasing higher than earning, they tend to have more working capital support the revenue. They have more receivables. A lot of times they have more inventory. That creates more revolver borrowing, which again affects interest expense. And so it's funny because at one time we spent a lot of our emphasis when we did the valuation was on loan to value. Loan to value is not nearly as important today as liquidity. And I think, keep in mind, it is just now that companies are starting to feel the effect of this increase in SOFR. Most people have 90-day SOFR, fixed SOFR rates. And so it's only now that you're starting to see this higher interest expense. So I think in the next 2-3 quarters, you're going to see more and more companies having liquidity issues, which is going to need some restructuring.
Okay, and Jack, how does your portfolio holding up?
I mean, we tend to focus, well, actually not tend to, we very intentionally focus on businesses that tend to not have elements of cyclicality. We tend to focus on tech-centric businesses that, hopefully we will get additional margin expansion with scale. Because of all of that, gratefully, and because of the tremendous teams at these businesses, I mean, portfolio is doing well. I don't think that's a perfect view of the entire economy for sure, but we've been very fortunate and feel good.
Okay. Let's turn a little bit more toward the just the nuts and bolts of finding deals. What's working? What's not working? How do you get and stay on the radar of investment banks like Mezro, like Lincoln International? And Nadim, we've got a question from the audience for you. With all the talk, of course, about artificial intelligence and chat GPT just exploding. What is your expectation for how artificial intelligence or predictive analytics may change the course of deal sourcing across the industry?
Thanks, David. It's a really good question. I'm just going to put a pin on that because I really want to comment on some of the stuff that Doug and Ron and Jack were talking about. Certainly, very good points in describing the current market and some of the constraints, some of the concerns, the math. I mean, Ron laid out the math problem just beautifully. That is the problem. It's a math problem. I do think if we can look a little bit long term, and private equity firms can't look like 10 years, right? They can't look 20 years long term. But if you can look maybe 2 or 3 years out, and you have an environment like you have today where if you can over equitize the deal to get it done, you can take whatever credit you can get at a higher rate, presumably, hopefully at a slightly lower valuation than what you've been used to in the last few years. I think there's an argument that in a couple of years, as things perform better, as the markets come back, you can always refi at a lower rate. You can get some of that money back, and maybe you're the ones that kind of look good in making these deals. So I think yes, there's challenges, but private equity firms are resilient. They're creative. There's an opportunity here. I think if you can keep that longer term view in mind, and certainly Jack's been doing it, like he mentioned, since 2008. So he's seen different cycles and different bubbles. And I'm sure Ron and Doug have lived through those as well. I think, yes, it's hard. It's hard right now, and those factors are certainly true. But I think there's an opportunity. It's only a matter of time before people on the buy side, assuming there is that decline. I think it really comes down to mismatch of valuation between sellers and buyers. If they can just find that, find that common ground and get those deals done, I think it's gonna, in the long term, it's gonna pay off in 2 or 3 years. So that's my 2 cents on that very interesting and relevant and current topic that our panelists that know a lot more than I do on it had talked about. Okay, on to AI and data science and predictive analytics. I think, look, I'll take the current market. Going back to the current market, we are so deeply involved with our clients right now because of these factors, because they have to get creative, strategic, not just on structuring the deal, but also finding deals. There aren't that many, and maybe, it's not as a robust pipeline or broad auctions as they've seen in the past. So, we're spending a lot of time. Our clients are using this time to get strategic, do a variety of projects, understand private equity assets by maturity, by subsector, understand the broker community, alternative sourcing channels, do automation, update, use alerting, ways to create efficiency, really figure out which geographies are going to be the best use of their time. So we are living, when they're drinking from a fire hose and the market is hot, these things don't get done. They, for good reason. You got closed deals. They don't need to get done. So right now is the time where our clients are really taking advantage and positioning themselves for when market factors do get better, but also during this time to unearth those opportunities that maybe their competition isn't seeing. Now, are we at the point? I think that's still just a precursor to things like AI and data science. Our parent Bain works with like the big private equity firms that we all know of, and more we're seeing a trend towards data science and technology specialists and internal teams trying to answer this fundamental question. We know that it can give us an edge, but how can it give us an edge, and what do we need to do? So, and it's trickling down to the middle market and lower middle market as well. I do think private equity industry in general is slow. It's slow to these types of changes and adoption and so on and so forth. So I think if we're just scratching the surface, my answer is yes. Like AI is going to play a huge impact in this space, in deal sourcing, in innovations to get deals done, and maybe the current market will be a push for clients to do that. But we're just scratching the surface. I don't know many private equity firms on the buy side that can say, oh, I've got, true AI and data science that's helping me, get an edge on my competition or drive performance. Though if they were doing it, I probably wouldn't know about it anyway, because they wouldn't want to let anybody know. So those are my thoughts on the AI side.
Thanks, Nadim. Well, Jack, you invest in software and technology. So if anyone's going to be at the cutting edge of deal sourcing technology, I imagine you guys are there. But Jack, in general, why don't you tell us what's working today when it comes to generating deal flow, and maybe also what worked a few years ago but's no longer working for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the sourcing function in private equity as just a game of opportunity cost, right? I mean, there is a limited set. There's a limited set of resources, time, money, days in the year, et cetera. There's a massive number of potential actions we could go take, very diverse. What should we take? Should it be one more call? This hypothetical, one more call that day, or should I go, dig into some data and try to unpack a new market, or should I go to this industry conference, or should I be on the road with office visit, et cetera. I mean, it's massive. It's overwhelming. I think that, having a data-centric approach really helps kind of organize all of those factors. And we spend a lot of time, routinely unpacking our own data and looking at it and saying, okay, what's working, what's not, how can we measure that, and how can we tweak to improve our own efficiency. We'll never fully optimize. I mean, it's too dynamic, and I think it's too big of a set of opportunities. But we spend a lot of time doing that. From just an approach standpoint, we have arrived at something I believe in very deeply, and that is just if we can use an approach that is partnership centric, that is collaborative, to me that works. And that on the direct sourcing side, it's collaborative. If we're meeting, first of all, we need to be very thoughtful. We need to be research heavy when reaching out to a founder or business owner. And when he or she, if we convince them to speak with us, we need to have real conviction around the thesis we've developed that pertains to their business. But more than anything, it's about speaking with that CEO and saying, hey, collaborating, say, what do you want to go do? What excites you? What are the opportunities out there? And look, we may or may not ultimately be the fit, but to me, that's a great approach versus, here's what we're going to do to your business. That's fine. Also, we're not going to pretend to be smart enough to tell them what to do. It's more of let's figure it out together. I think that works. At least for us, it has. And very much the same, with investment banks as well that we've been fortunate to work with over the years. We just try to be collaborative. We try to be, we try to work with them, the incredible knowledge and resources they have internally to help us develop and add depth to our own investment theses, to the different sectors and themes that we're pursuing. And then ultimately, that I think turns into opportunities that, we might be well positioned to win and to be the right partner for the company. So, I mean, it probably is going to come across as cheesy. Everybody listening here will go kind of with an eye roll, but I mean, that genuinely, that's how we try to approach. And I think if you compare the hard elements, the quantitative elements of data, thinking deeply about, research, opportunity costs, et cetera, opportunity analysis, and then pairing that with the softer but incredibly important elements of partnership approach, being collaborative, I think that works.
Jack, that all actually makes no eye rolls here. That all makes sense to me. And we do have a follow-up question for you. What that I'm sure Doug and Ron would be interested in. What are the most important criteria to select an M&A firm when selling a portfolio company?
Yeah, relationship, depth of experience, recency and relevancy of experience as it pertains to one of our companies. And I think we've worked on this for many years. We really try. This is back to the collaborative piece, the collaboration piece. We try very early in our investment period to begin engaging, in conversations, in potentially meetings and interactions with investment banks, with the right investment banks, the ones that we perceive to be best fit, and then we try to stay in touch and work together all the way through the course of our investment period. I mean, by the time it comes, for us to say, okay, let's go really contemplate an exit. I mean, we probably have a pretty good answer because it's developed over the course of years as to who the right potential partner or partners are to help represent us and take the business out.
Okay, that's very helpful, Jack. Let me turn to Doug, and Doug, I wonder if you would give us maybe a state of the market on narrow versus broad-based auctions. It seemed to me the long-term trend was toward narrower processes, but maybe with all the things going on in the market today, that's changed. And then a follow-up would be, how do you make sure that you're on Doug Brookman's radar and get invited to these auctions?
So I would say that our process dynamics haven't generally changed very much, but we also weren't a group who decided to go out to 500 of your closest friends to every single deal we put into the market. So that I think probably has reduced over time as well. Look, we track industry thesis that folks are coming up with. We note all these things. So we're trying to put the right pieces of the puzzle and put the right players into the process. So sure, is it quote unquote narrow? Yes, but I guess aside or more than narrow, it hopefully has the right people in the process. So that's really what we're focusing on, as opposed to just sending more of a general deal teaser out to the market and saying, hope we can find somebody to buy this business. I would say in terms of getting involved in a more narrow process, one of the other things that we track is behavior. And there are a lot of folks that from time to time talk the talk, but don't necessarily walk the walk, or they love an industry, they love something, and then you show them a few opportunities in the space and they have no interest, don't follow up, don't schedule calls, kind of drop the ball. I mean, those are things that we're tracking because we're looking for engagement in the process. And if there's no engagement overall, then is that a firm issue on the sponsor side or the strategic side? We're trying to make sure that we have that engagement and we have that dialogue going back and forth. And then I guess, look, you may or may not win the day, but putting forth the effort, if you get past MPs and you're looking to run it in LOI and maybe you lose, having a good showing, doing the work early, turning comments to purchase agreements, getting involved in asking, I don't know about spending a ton of money on third-party diligence or third-party service providers, but getting people engaged up front, starting to diligence things early and really showing that high level of interest, I think bodes well for future opportunities to get involved in more narrow processes.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Got about 10, 15 minutes left, so I want to make a final call for questions. Please just go to your control panel and use the question feature to ask. We've had some great questions, help drive the discussion already, and I would love to get a few more. Say, Ron, let's turn to you. Earlier, you were talking about just how it's a question of math, whether deals get done this year. In some cases, I wonder if you could offer suggestions on creative ways when it comes to deal financing, private equity firms can try to get deals done and sort of make the math work.
Sure, and it's like recycling ideas from, I don't know, 10 years ago,
Sure.
because we've been such it's kind of funny to think about them now because we haven't had to for so long in such a low interest rate environment. But the first one, you do see some private equity groups write a check. I think Nadeem may have even referred to that. It's a risky thing for a private equity firm because they're probably going to commit more capital than they would like to, and you don't know what that financing is going to be. You don't know what the IRR is, but you do see it happening when a private equity group really wants an asset. They'll write a check for the whole thing. Probably more conventional things are earnouts, which again we haven't talked about in many years because a seller was like, no, this is an all cash environment today. We don't need earnouts. But you're cropping up on earnouts, and one of the reasons for it, interestingly, particularly on our industrials sector this past year, having a lot of trouble selling companies off of 2022 earnings. Because of inflation, there was a lot of inventory gains. You had $100 million of inventory at December 31st. Prices went up 10%. All of a sudden, you made $10 million in EBITDA just because you sold that inventory at the higher prices, which you're not going to be able to replicate. So there are concerns in some cases that 2022 results are not necessarily sustainable in 23. There go, you have earnouts. Seller paper can be used. That's always something that kind of bridges the gap. Of course, it usually has to be junior to to the third party debt, and can be a little bit expensive, but it is a way to try and bridge the gap between a buyer and seller and help out the financing. And then not selling 100% of the company. You buy, which is somewhat like the sell of paper maybe, but you might have some upside if you bridge the gap by only selling 80% of the company, 90% of the company. One interesting thing we're seeing, by the way, on the financing, because if you do have a loan that's at S450 and not wanting to go to S650 today, because you got a very attractive loan with not much equity requirement, we're seeing more and more holdco PIK notes so that it does not affect the operating company debt. People don't want to do anything to that operating company debt because it's going to trigger an increase in spreads, and they might covenants, because in the past there haven't been that many covenants. Now everything has like 2 covenants, and so they put the money at the holdco, push it down, and that way the lenders don't have any consent rights. They don't have to do anything, and things can get done. That is particularly used more for add-ons than platform companies, but it's a technique we're seeing more and more. Well, there's some ideas for you.
Okay, all good ones, and yeah, I remember many of them from.
You have to dust off the old corporate finance textbooks to find them.
So a question just popped in from the audience for Doug. How do you see time to close changing this year? Should we anticipate longer or shorter negotiations, and why?
We've seen people try and stretch them in LOIs. Whether or not it's accepted is a whole nother discussion. I mean, I don't think that people are trying to close things in the same timeline they were before. 60 days seems to be a reasonable time period right now. But again, to Ron's point, finding the right financing, finding the right partner in a financing is obviously easier said than done. So it can take longer. I don't think the other diligence streams are taking longer. I think it's just a function of people are dragging their feet, trying to prove numbers, and they then are looking for the right lenders, and it just takes longer because of all of that.
Okay, Doug, and another quick follow-up question for you. I'm going to combine a few questions because we have folks that are asking about sectors and how attractive they are to sponsors right now. So I think, Doug, you might be best positioned, and Ron, sure, you can sure weigh in too. Business, so the choices are business services, asset-light business services, asset-heavy industries, or banking. So what's attractive to sponsors?
Well, I would say that the trend has been the asset-light business services deals. However, in a rate and a financing environment like we're in today, the asset-heavy industrial deals are significantly easier to finance just based on asset coverage alone. So, I don't know that there's a right way. There's multiple ways to skin a cat, and folks who are in that kind of asset-heavy industrial universe on the sponsor side, these are the markets where they make a tremendous amount of money buying things right, financing things that have good asset coverage, and putting less equity into the deals than they might otherwise would. But the business services deals, the reoccurring revenue type businesses, the contractually obligated businesses, HVAC services obviously has been a crazy space, roofing, commercial services, janitorial businesses. These are all areas that folks have chased and really dumped a huge amount of capital into. So I would say that likely you'll see business services, especially critical business services, continue to be a focal point for private equity moving forward.
Okay. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I want to do one final lightning round of questions where I ask the same question of each panelist, and we'll close out the program that way. Just this morning, I was reading that think the economy continued to expand in the fourth quarter, if I'm remembering correctly, at a reasonably decent rate. Maybe it was sort of in the 2% range. So with that as a backdrop, my question is whether you think we will have a recession this year, and if so, how bad of one? And Jack, start with you. And just a real quick, a minute, maybe a minute.
Yep. Yes. But from a technical standpoint, yes. But I think it will be markedly uneven. I think that there will be certain sectors that will remain quite resilient, and I think that there will be others that that will prove more challenging.
Okay, Ron, what's your prognostication?
I think there will be. I don't think it will be that strong. I think it'll be mild, but I think Powell has consistently said he is going to break inflation's back. And the only way to do that, and he uses the word pain, and he's going to continue to inflict higher interest rates or sustain interest rates until he gets inflation to that 2%, because he can't back out on it. And so that pain is going to result in some recession. How severe? I don't think it'll be that severe, but I do think we will have one.
Okay, yeah, inflation seems to be tempering, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Nadim, what's your prediction?
If I'm not mistaken, we had negative GDP growth in Q1, negative in Q2 slightly, and then Q3 was positive, and now Q4 came out positive. I don't think we go back into the negatives. I think it's not like a great economy or things are firing, but it's a period of mixed signals, and some things are good and some things aren't so good. So I think we might get close to zero growth, but it goes into the negative.
Okay, and Doug will give you the final word.
I have no different view than any of the other panelists, although I think there will be a larger labor pool to pick from, especially into the industrial, manufacturing, construction sectors, as folks stop, permitting new construction projects because of interest rates and because of just the costs. And I think things will definitely somewhat normalize over the next kind of 6 to 9 months.
Okay, we'll end on that optimistic note, and I'm afraid we are out of time. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd especially like to thank our sponsor, SBS by Bain & Company, for making the webinar possible. And I'd like to thank our speakers for doing a bang-up job with the program. Nadim Malik of SBS by Bain & Company, Doug Brookman of Mesro Financial, Ron Kahn of Lincoln International, Jack Senek of Thompson Street Capital Partners. Please enjoy the rest of your day and look for the recording by email to arrive in the next 2 hours. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.